Several months ago, ISRI Chair Mark Luan came to our convention team asking us to put together this session that he would moderate. Like so many of us, he has both heard from our members about the problems of moving materials on the roads, the rails, and on the seas. Today we hope to learn a little bit more about the scope of the problem, to learn what is and isn't being done to solve it, and what we as individuals and as an industry must do more than just coping. But first, transportation is no different than any other part of our business. Safety first. As many of you know, ISRI not only promotes safe operations across our industry, we have put a special emphasis on transportation safety. The roads and highways of this country, or our trucks, encounter the general public, making transportation safety even more vital if that's possible. Our staff works regularly with transportation officials in the states and in Washington, and we're pleased to have one of those officials here with us today. Please help me welcome the Chief Safety Officer and Deputy Administrator of the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, Mr. Jack Van Steenberg.
Thank you, Stephen, and the introductory music, Enter Sandman. I love it. My daughter goes to Virginia Tech, so that's one of their theme songs for the welcoming of their football games. Anyway, thank you, Stephen, for the kind introduction. My name is Jack Van Steenberg. I'm the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration's Chief Safety Officer and Assistant Administrator, and I'm pleased to join you this morning at this morning's Transportation Safety Awards ceremony. It's my first time here at ISRI, and I did some homework before I got here, and I realize you have 750 motor carriers. You represent about 15,000 drivers. I had no idea. But I appreciate the partnership, though, and I hope we continue it. The awardees today are recognized for long-standing records of excellence that they've developed over years and exhibited over years. Driver awards, fleet awards, vehicle technician awards, and really these awards are deserving. So I'm pleased to join and spend a few minutes discussing the importance of safety and partnership and the ways that FMCSA is dedicated to making our roads safer in partnering with you. At our agency, safety is our priority, and our basic mission is to prevent highway crashes involving large trucks and buses throughout North America. We regulate over 500,000 motor carriers. A lot of them are private. The vast majority, 90%, are small businesses with 10 or fewer vehicles. We also oversee 5 million licensed commercial driver's licenses operating on the highways and 12 million registered vehicles. I told you we work to prevent crashes. From our rulemaking to research to other programs, FMCSA's activities focus on our strengths, crafting smart, cost-effective regulations that improve safety based on data, solid data and analysis. We develop these regulations with an eye towards effective regulatory reform, and we also seek the industry input, and we want to listen to what the industry has to say. We've had some success over the years. The fatality rate for large trucks and buses is at its lowest point, but we're starting to see the fatalities rise and rise. Last year, 4,317 fatalities occurred in crashes involving large trucks and buses. That's an increase from the prior year and another increase from the year before that. We're working with the National Safety Council and other organizations on the road to zero. And that's our goal, is to have 0 fatalities across America by 2050. 0 fatalities. Can we do it? You look out there, you look at me probably going, this guy's not real. It's not practical. And I thought the same thing at one time. I said, it's not practical. We're always going to have fatalities. But I ask you, what level of fatalities is acceptable? Look to your right, look to your left, look at pictures. Any of them acceptable? I submit to you the answer is no. So I think we all can achieve or strive towards that goal of 0 fatalities. We've had some success. Seatbelt use has risen to 86% among large truck drivers, an increase from 67% back in the 1980s. So we've seen a lot of success. But I also caution you, last year 722 truck drivers were killed in crashes. Why? Not wearing seatbelts, unsafe speed, distraction, fatigue. So we need to improve. The carriers here, make sure your drivers are buckled in. Make sure they're not speeding. Make sure they have enough rest. And I'm going to bring one more number up to you. 20%, over 20%, a little over 20% of the vehicles we inspect nationwide are put out of service for having some mechanical defect. So it's more important that we have employees that are trained well in vehicle inspections, vehicle maintenance. And I submit that the awardees today, I believe there's a couple of them that are going to get technician awards, the Golden Wrench Awards. So it's important to have trained vehicle technicians because 20.6% exactly is put out of service. So everything we do as an agency, both in the field and at headquarters, ties back to this principle, safety. Trucks are a vital part of the safe, efficient, and reliable transportation system that we all deserve. I submit to you, safety is good business. A strong safety culture and thriving business are not mutually exclusive. In fact, in the commercial motor vehicle industry, the two are linked. We strive to listen and respond to industry needs while also meeting our safety goals. So I want to talk to you about a couple rulemakings, just one, and I know this one here has impacted you, the electronic logging device. I was talking to Stephen earlier, and he said that, there are concerns about this rule, and what I told him is, really, nothing has changed with the hours of service. The hours of service have not changed. What the ELD has done, the electronic logging device has done, is brought more attention to detention time or waiting time when you're at shipping facilities. It's brought more attention to roadway, when the traffic's backed up and it's congestion. So we want to listen to you. Administrator Ray Martinez has said that he's open to listen to the industry and their concerns about hours of service. So if your industry has concerns, bring it to our attention. We want to listen. We want to get the ELD rule right. We want to get the hours of service rules right. And we think it's the best thing for your industry. So the ELD compliance date was December 18, 2017. We're really seeing strong compliance with this rule. And not all your drivers are impacted by this rule. If your drivers are out on the road basically less than 8 days in a 30-day period, they're not subject to that. If they drive a limited amount of miles, they're not subject to the ELD mandate. The ELD mandate basically just replaces the logbook. So if you had to do a logbook in the past, you need to do one now. But we're seeing 96% compliance in the inspections we do. So we've recently announced 90-day temporary waiver for certain industries, mainly the agricultural industry. And we're open to hear, if an industry has an exemption request, we're open to hear that as well. But we think and we believe, and this is based on science, that the ELD will save lives. It's going to limit the amount of hours the drivers can work to what they're supposed to work. And we feel that fatigue will be impacted, where drivers will be less fatigued. Now, the industry, it takes a while to get used to these technologies, but over time, the technologies usually prevail, and drivers in the industry themselves really start to get used to these technologies and like them. A couple other rules I want to talk about. One is a drug and alcohol clearinghouse rule that kicks in January 2020. What this rule will do will prohibit or stop drivers from what we call job hopping. Those drivers who tested positive for alcohol or drugs will not be able to get a job. All these positive tests will be reported to a clearinghouse. You, the industry, when you're hiring a driver, will check that clearinghouse to see if the driver's name is in that clearinghouse. And if the is, and they didn't do the return to duty work, then obviously you're not going to hire the driver. The driver, or the applicant in this case, has to give permission for you to check the clearinghouse as well. So if a driver says, no, you can't check my name in the clearinghouse, I think you're smart people, you're not going to hire that driver. But this is long overdue. You do not want drivers that have a history of abusing drugs and alcohol. And another rule, this rule was done by consensus in a negotiated rulemaking, was entry-level driver training. All new drivers who want to get a Class A or Class B license have to go through a curriculum that was really established by the industry. And for those who are teaching this curriculum, they have to register with us, and this takes effect in February of 2020. So you would have to have a driver go through this curriculum first before you can hire them to get and for them to have their CDL. So these are three rules I really wanted to touch on: the electronic logging device, the drug and alcohol clearinghouse, and the entry-level driver training. Now I go back to the fatalities and the injuries. So did you know that of all the work zone fatalities, about 27% involve a large truck? How do we prevent those? A lot of them, it's basically, again, congestion, driver distraction, driver fatigue. About 500 of fatalities are trucks running off the road. So a lot of people are talking about autonomous vehicles right now. And autonomous vehicles, in reality, are when the vehicle operates itself, and we call that a level 5 with no driver. So let's talk about these advanced driving systems: automatic emergency braking, lane assist, adaptable cruise control. If we can accelerate the deployment of these technologies in fleets, I think we're going to make a vast improvement in prevention of crashes on the road. And I shouldn't say I think, I know we are. And I go back to that road to zero with the zero fatalities. I looked at one fleet, and they had rear-end collisions, so work zones, think of rear-end collisions. They had a reduction in rear-end collisions by 65%. More important, they had a reduction in severity of the injury by 96% by using automatic emergency braking. I also think when you get to the adaptable cruise control and the adaptable braking, that's where a car ahead of you maybe slows down suddenly from 60 to 30, and the truck behind it will read it and will slow down to that from 60 to 30 automatically on its own. These technologies can save lives. And you know, I know it's a cost to the industry. The major fleets basically are deploying these technologies. And they keep the fleets for about 4 years. And then if you buy a used truck, I would ask you to seriously think about getting these technologies, because to me, they're a lifesaver. We recently published a request for comments on automated driving systems. I would hope your industry would look at that request for comments. We support automation in vehicles as long as it's safe, but how do we assure these technologies are safe? How do we know the fleets operating these technologies are safe? This is where we need the industry's help, and we ask for your comments by May 10th of 2018. It's on our docket. Finally, I wanted to share a word about our campaign, and I looked at your magazine, And I saw that you had an article on Our Roads, Our Safety campaign, and I certainly appreciate your commitment to safety. Our campaign, Our Roads, Our Safety campaign, educates the public on how to drive safely around the nearly 12 million large trucks and buses operating on our nation's highway. Why is this important? We want to teach the public that there's blind spots. Large trucks just can't stop on a dime. There's weight differences, longer stopping distances, limited maneuverability. These trucks and buses present challenges to bicyclists, pedestrians. You know, when a bus makes a turn and you start walking on the curb, you got to be careful. So how do we teach the driving public of the limitations that trucks and buses have? How do we teach the motoring public on the benefits that the industry brings to our economy? And these are something that we do and we're putting on our website, but we also are working with the industry. And I appreciate ISRI's commitment and partnership to Our Roads, Our Safety campaign. And I really want to engage your industry a lot more. Like I said, this is my first time here, and I'm very, very impressed. So, in closing, I wanted to say our Administrator Ray Martinez, who couldn't be here, but what he said publicly is that we do not own safety alone. We all own safety. FMCSA, the states, the industry, law enforcement, drivers, and the motoring public. I am pleased that FMCSA and ISRI have established such a wonderful partnership that recognizes the safety is a joint concern, and I look forward to continuing that partnership in years to come. I really do want to partner with you in all our efforts in the roads to zero fatalities. Thank you for your time. To the award winners, congratulations. It means a lot. It makes our job a lot easier. Drivers, fleets, mechanics, technicians, thank you. I appreciate it, and thank you very much for your time, and enjoy the rest of your conference.
Thank you, Jack. I wish I had that entry music too. You know, that's kind of fun. Please know that ISRI will continue to advocate for transportation safety in the months and years to come. It is now my pleasure to welcome to the stage the Vice Chair of ISRI, Mr. Gary Champlin.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Good morning. Thank you all for being here today for the Spotlight on Transportation. The truckers who drive for us and the mechanics who keep our equipment in peak condition are some of the most important people in our facilities. Their talent and skill truly mean life or death for themselves and others on the road. Today, we are pleased to recognize some key people in our industry who exemplify the safe operations we all strive for each day. On the screens out here, you are listings of the winners of this year's ISRI Transportation Safety Awards, generously sponsored by RecycleGuard. These awards recognize the top companies and individuals who demonstrate that transportation safety is a core value in their operations. This includes outstanding commitment to the safety of employees, coworkers, and the general public. The Driver of the Year award is given to the commercial driver with the best 20 or more year driving record, with a minimum qualification being no at-fault accidents during the driver's career. ISRI's Golden Wrench Award is given to the best heavy vehicle maintenance technician or manager who exhibits outstanding efforts, achievements, and contributions to ensure that commercial vehicles are safe on the road. It is my pleasure to introduce the winners of both of these awards today, and we'd love to have you join me up here on stage for a presentation. Please hold your applause until I have announced both winners. Our Driver of the Year award goes to a gentleman with 44 years of safe driving experience. From Sims Middle Management in Sacramento, California, Mr. Joseph J. Cody. And our Golden Wrench Award is presented to a 12-year veteran service technician from Rocky Mountain Recycling in Carson City, Colorado, Mr. Armando Haiti, Sr. Congratulations to both of you. Please join me on stage with Jack Van Steenberg with the FMCA SA and Dan Curran from Recycle Guard to help present these awards. Thank you. Sure. Bill and Jack. Sure. Thanks. It is now my pleasure to welcome back our moderator for today's session, the current chair of ISRI, Mr. Mark Lewin.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Gary. I hope you enjoyed your first official on-stage duty. Starting next year, you'll get to feel these stage lights a whole lot more. As Stephen mentioned at the top of the show, today's program was my idea. Transportation's a problem for all of us. No matter where I've gone for ISRI meetings in the past 2 years, the problems of trucking, rail access, and more have been a hot topic. The problem is apparently not limited to the scrap industry. It's as broad as manufacturing and agriculture and construction can get. If a business is moving stuff on the road or the rail, they're having many of the same issues that we have. As much as I would like it to be, today's session is not likely to come up with the solutions. What I do hope we can do is to get a better understanding of both the scope and the specifics that are impacting our transportation problems, and that from there, we as individual business owners and as a trade association can better define our strategies for creating solutions. With me today are two experts in their fields. First, let me introduce Mike Peters, the Senior Vice President for Real Estate Industrial Development with Genesee and Wyoming Railroad. Mike leads a team responsible for working with shippers, railroads, and local economic development groups to develop rail-centric customer solutions here in North America. Next, we have Bill Sullivan, the Executive Vice President for Advocacy with the American Trucking Association based in Washington, D.C. Bill's a longtime friend of the industry, having worked as Legislative Director for Senator Richard Shelby and in other positions within the Department of Justice and in the Senate. Bill's job these days is to advance a pro-trucking, pro-safety, pro-efficiency agenda on Capitol Hill. Gentlemen, we know you come in peace, and we're happy to welcome you. My hope is in the next hour that we can take a closer look at our transportation predicament and find out more what all of us can do to make things better. So please welcome to the stage Mike and Bill.
Go out in the middle, or I'll take this.
The other housekeeping thing that I need to mention is that when I originally envisaged this program, what I hope to do is get some friends of mine from Wolf Transportation to come and be an analyst. And so unfortunately, you're going to have to settle for my analysis, and I'm going to do some of the color commentary with the guys. But if you do have questions, we're going to get to that point where you can ask away. And if you don't have questions, I've come with my own, so don't worry. But anyway, I think we'll have a really interesting program.
Thanks.
What I had thought about doing is I need both the guys to make short presentations. So Mike, if you'd like to start.
Okay.
And you can do it from here, you can do it from there, but if not, feel free to sit down and relax.
All right. Thanks. Well, I'll walk around a little bit. Maybe that's easier. My name is Mike Peters. I work for Genesee in Wyoming. We own short line railroads around the country. And so I want to just take a couple minutes to explain to you what it means to be a short line railroad and how it fits in the overall network. So people often ask me, they say, Genesee in Wyoming, what do you do from the state of Wyoming? But the actual history of our railroads started in the late 1890s with a 13-mile railroad that in Genesee and Wyoming County, New York, in upstate New York. The irony is that we outlasted the counties, and as you can see from the map here, we still own and operate that 13-mile railroad, but it's no longer in Genesee or Wyoming counties. And I can tell you the railroad didn't move, so a little difference in the line there. Give you a little bit of idea of the background. We are a publicly traded company. We own or operate 122 railroads around the world. The great majority of that is in the US and Canada, about 8,000 employees around the world. Our growth has really come through acquisition. In the last 15 plus years, we've acquired 100 plus short line railroads around the country. Give you an idea of our operations, we're in 41 states, and it's funny how this typically works out. So I was talking to a couple of folks backstage and realized that our Utah Railway runs right next to Dan's facility here, Dave's facility here, and then also the Kyle Railway runs right through Concordia, Kansas as well. So this gives you an idea of our footprint around the country. We move about 1.6 million carloads a year. We interchange with all the major Class 1 railroads. The best way to think about this is we act as, say, a feeder airline to the larger railroads. And to give you an idea, our scrap business is about 6% of that 1.6 million. So we're a little more dependent on the scrap business than the Class 1s. And really about half of that is scrap metal and about half of that is scrap paper. Safety is very important to us. It's been a definite target for our business. If you look, we're the orange line there down at the bottom, and we run about 1 per 200,000 hours, 1 injury per 200,000 hours, which is better than the Class 1s and better than the short lines as a whole. And I think the message that I would add to this is it really is a cultural thing with our company, and I encourage each of you to flow that through your companies as well. Your people will react. If you model good safety performance, they will react accordingly as well. And then the last piece for us is customer satisfaction. So as I mentioned, we're kind of the short line, we're the feeder airline. I can't come to you and say I can take your product from, let's say, Salt Lake City all the way to Los Angeles. But what I can do is provide the absolute best service for that piece that I have. So every 2 years, we go out and survey all of our customers. And our goal on that is to score an 8 out of 10. That's our survey company tells us that's where you get a sticky customer. Our goal is 8. We just about got to 8 in 2017. But I think the thing that's interesting is that with our focus on service, we've actually been able to outperform the trucking industry and most other railroads as well. And again, the message there is that's what we have to sell as a short line, is that we can provide a level of service that maybe you can't get from other places. So that's really all I had. I wanted to just give a little bit of a background about G&W and who we are and what we do. And when we get around to it, I'll be happy to answer questions.
Very good, thank you. Phil, would you like to take a couple minutes and tell us about what you do and maybe key up some ideas for questions for people?
You bet. And Mike had hidden that part about beating the trucking industry up until now, so I may have to punch back. American Trucking Association is thrilled to be able to represent truckers and carriers, and have been working really closely with customers, coalitions of groups, and government to address a lot of the problems that I think you all are going to be talking about and have been talking about. As after Billy had squired me around last night to a reception and then to dinner, I got to talk to a lot of folks and heard the same kind of problems that we hear from our members about why there's not enough in the way of often truck drivers or capacity issues that we have. And I know that's been a real frustration for all sorts of customers. So I leapt at the opportunity to come and discuss with you all and learn a little bit more about how this impacts you and how we may be able to work together on it. I did want to say, and playing off of some of Jack Van Steenberg's comments, we are all about, all the issues in front of us, I think this year, are about capacity and safety. And so as we've launched into this year, there is, we believe, a 50,000 truck driver shortage is the estimate out there right now. Average age of truck drivers is around 50 or 51. You can't come into truck driving in interstate commerce until you're in your 20s. So 18-year-olds, we've been focused on how can we get closer to bringing people in right when they're hitting a career if they're not wanting to go to college, and not losing them for a number of years. And frankly, the economy has driven a lot of this too. We were, dare I say, as surprised as a lot of people in Washington, D.C. when Donald Trump won the presidency. And they came out of the gates, notwithstanding the amount of noise you see in the media or on Twitter accounts, they came out of the gates really well with us and their transition team, focused on getting stuff done. And so we had meetings before, sort of between the election and when the president came in. I know Billy's told me about the fact that you all had worked with their transition team as well, and they were totally focused on getting stuff done. The coalition that helped elect this president looks a lot like truck drivers, and so we have had many conversations on how can we grow this career. If we have a problem, which is that there are 50,000 empty seats right now that could be hauling freight at an average salary or a median salary of $55,000, how can we bring more people into this? So the work at ATA has been very friendly with people at FMCSA, with people at DOT, Secretary Chow, who used to be the Secretary of Labor, and so she's very familiar with how outreach and how the organs of government can help do that. But also Secretary Acosta at the Department of Labor has been very close to us and been working with us on ways that the existing infrastructure in Department of Labor may be helpful, whether it's some of the interactions and funds that they have for community college and VOTEC programs and bringing folks in. Truck drivers isn't the only shortage we have. We also have mechanics and technicians. As we're looking out on the horizon and how we can address capacity, another big interest of ours is infrastructure. And so if drivers are tied up in traffic, or as Jack mentioned, are detained, waiting on loads or dropping off loads, those are drivers who could be out hauling freight. And we have worked very hard with the president and with others to rally around increasing our investment in infrastructure. So as that effort may get off the ground later this year, I think it'll be surprising if it gets off the ground before the election. But we've been very engaged in that. And last thing I might lead with would be autonomous technologies. We've been very interested in those technologies. We have technology councils within ATA that are very engaged with each level of automation, everything from ABS brakes all the way up to fully driverless trucks. We maintain that driverless trucks are a long ways off. So there are some predictions, some analysts who will talk about, 2, 3, 4 years, we'll start to see deployment. particularly in southern states where it's sunny, not to get too weedy about the challenges with sensors and cameras, but so we think that there will be levels of automation that can begin to add capacity, but it's probably a few years off. So, but for these limited uses and perhaps dedicated hauls, I think we're really mostly focused on recruiting drivers, on adding trucks. There have been, I think, 76% increase in Class 8 tractor sales. The last report I saw was February. So everything seems to be trending in the right direction, but for the sake of customers, for the sake of our carriers, we're really trying to move it quickly.
All right. What I think I'll do is I'm going to ask some questions, and unfortunately not all of them are going to be for both of our panelists, but then there are some questions, and I think you probably are sitting here and you realize some directions that we're going to go with some of these conversations. So my first question is for Bill. Do you have some ideas, and you and I talked a little bit last night about some things, just basic little ideas that people can do, companies can use out there to make themselves more popular with their trucking company, or to help out the drivers?
Great question. We believe, let me pull in a piece of what Jack talked about, but electronic logging devices. One of the things that we've seen from larger fleets has been how they work with their customers. And detention time is time that a driver's not making money, as many of them are paid by the mile, and that our carriers have equipment tied up and it's not very productive. So drivers hate doing loads where they're sitting at the dock for a long time. As the larger fleets have been able to work with their customers based on data that they already have to turn this around and to bring efficiencies, to work with their shippers to bring efficiencies. So everything from leaving trailers behind that can be preloaded and just hooked up and moved. It is, as you and I were talking about last night, I think there's been some pricing benefit. Those are the types of customers that carriers really want to go with. And as shipping companies have made those types of changes, they see lower rates, they see more carriers who want to work with them. But when it's a tight market, a number of our carriers are talking about turning down loads right now, and that's it sounds like a good problem to have, but it's not. So for the customers who tie up trucks for 3 or 4 hours, oh, now we need to load your truck, let's get started. And it has this trickle-down effect where those carriers can't keep drivers hired. Their driver turnover is really high because the drivers don't get paid. I think most of you are familiar with, and may be motor carriers in some cases, but the 14-hour duty clock that they're on, if they're burning 4 of that just sitting at the dock, that's time they don't get paid later on. So I think working with, planning ahead a little bit, sequencing your loads, asking the shipper how you can turn the loads faster will all redound to the benefit of the shipper.
See, and I think this is just great advice. So to the extent that you can partner with a trucking company or a couple of trucking companies and take and preload containers or trailers so that they just bring an empty and take the full one, maybe do some axle checks and stuff and get out, you're helping the drivers and you're helping yourself. So it's partnering up. Mike, talk to us a little bit about maybe what you can do, because I think that the popular conception out here is that one of the big class ones, and hopefully you guys listen to what Mike was saying and you understand the difference between Genesee and Wyoming's operations and then the class 1 rails, so the Union Pacifics and the Burlington Northerns and the CSXs of the country. Those are, they're different scales, they're different things. Can you tell us maybe, is there a minimum that the short line railroad needs in terms of number of cars to handle that makes sense? Or what are the kind of metrics that you guys look at to see whether something works to make sense for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. Certainly for us, I like to say in the short line industry, we stop and pick up pennies, not unlike your industry for sure, right? So we don't necessarily have a minimum or a maximum that makes sense. And frankly, that's part of the value that we try to add to the Class 1 railroads is some of these projects that are maybe too small for them. What we do is we can take your traffic, accumulate it with other shippers on the line, and then give it to the Class 1. So it's coming in a much larger block to them, and then has more interest as an overall business side of it. But we have folks that ship as little as one car a month in various places. But it comes down to what you were saying was utilization of assets, right? If that's a customer that's one car a month, but they want that car to sit there for 30 days while they throw a few pounds in every day, that's certainly less interesting than someone where we can put a car in there and they'll load it and we can get it back in 24 or 48 hours and then be able to ship it. So the quick answer is there really is no minimum size for us, but we are looking to be able to utilize our assets as much as possible.
So let me expand on this a little bit. If you have somebody who is located along or somewhere close to your rights of way, and maybe you'll have to explain a little bit about rights of way and where you operate, but maybe they could approach you guys and do something and maybe get better service, especially if you're being serviced by one of the Class 1 rails now.
Yeah, great question. So, one of the things that we have an advantage of, certainly within the short line industry, is we have a little more flexibility in terms of, let's say, building new spurs or some spurs that are out there. It's usually much more cost effective to break into a short line, let's say, for a new switch than it would be within a Class 1 just based on the technology required, et cetera. But a lot of times what we've done for small shippers is we'll have space within our right-of-way, and we can provide the ability to transload into a rail car if needed, even if the rail doesn't make it all the way to your site. But the other thing that happens is, and one of the things that my team does is we work with customers on designing rail spurs and being able to build off of our tracks. Because I freely admit, doing business with railroads is hard, whether it's a Class 1 or a short line or whomever. It can be a challenge to understand exactly everything that needs to be done. And one of the things that we try to do is simplify that process. For example, we have an engineer on staff who will help design the track into a site. It's just a way to try to simplify what can be a difficult process.
Okay, and then for everybody's edification here, there are a number of short line railroads around the country. A few years ago, I talked to there's a guy from Indiana, and the whole state is essentially a short line railroad, even though the main, the Class 1s run through there. And he knew all the big customers, all the people that I knew within the industry, and so it was really an interesting education process. But I think that if you do ship by rail, and if you're not currently being serviced by a short line railroad, come and give Mike a business card and ask him some questions after the program, because I think that there's some serious benefit for you.
One other comment that maybe I could add to that. There are about 550 short lines in the U.S. and Canada, so there is a fairly dense network out there of short lines. The other thing I would say is that many of the short lines can provide access to more than one Class 1 railroad, which gives you a level of flexibility that you may not otherwise have. Maybe allows you to reach a wider customer base more cost effectively, or gives you the opportunity to play, let's say, CSX and NS off against each other that you don't have if you're direct served there.
And I think that's a great point. Thanks, Mike.
Yep.
Let's shift back over to trucks and Bill here. Bill, would you talk to us a little bit about intermodal use? I don't know if that's something that you guys deal with a lot, but is that something where you represent the truckers out there, and what can you tell us about that?
We do. We have actually a sort of separate conference, so an intermodal carriers conference that meets. The largest issues that they're fighting about right now are really about sort of throughput in ports and about independent contractors. So what we have had challenges are small and medium-sized fleets getting targeted by labor and filing administrative law cases. This is particularly in California and New Jersey and a number of others. So for us, it has mostly been lawsuits. It's sort of in the government affairs space. But everything is intermodal now, so it is the incredibly rare product or good in the United States that's not rolling on a truck at some point, but it has typically been on a ship, been on rail, and on a truck. So I've heard some of our estimates, and I'm sure Ed Wolf or one of his folks would go deep weeds on how the industry is moving toward that, the big companies like Schneider and XPO, and working across borders, working across modes. But most of ours has been focused on managing the throughput and just how horrible for us, and I don't know about rail, but how horrible the throughput is, particularly in ports. I think our rail friends, we're pretty tight and understand the efficiencies better, but stuff coming off of ships, we're having a lot of trouble.
See, and this is the amazing thing to me is I was in Long Beach had been February, and I look at all the trucks just lined up to get into the port, and it's like, geez, if they could make this more efficient, I think the entire driver shortage in the country would be taken care of. But I don't know. It's just lines of trucks lined up to try and get in and take that container to the port, and then there are other lines of truckers trying to get a box to bring out, and it's just we got to do something to make that more efficient.
It's a very effective place for labor organizing, and we have a number of really big carriers, UPS being one, but that are Teamsters. So we're fine with labor, but there are places where we're fighting. And the fight in ports, as I think about and listen to folks talk about where automation may drive, if you have a bunch of people sitting around waiting for boxes to come off of ships, it seems to me that, and people a lot smarter than me, that there are ways to sequence, sort of automated systems to deal with that until you put a driver in the cab and move it on. So I think the amount of automation that may be available there in the next 20 years is going to be significant. But until then, it's not the most efficient system.
Yeah, and just from the other day or a couple months ago going over there, we're not there yet. So we got a ways to go. Kind of coming off of that, if we talk a little bit about some things that you mentioned earlier about driverless trucks, automation, and things like that. This is something where every time I see something on automation, there was a thing in Phoenix here not too long ago where a pedestrian was killed by a driverless car, and a bunch of red herring kind of things came out about the guy who was operating the driverless car from wherever it was, had a criminal record, and it's like, well, so you're saying that he was intentionally running down the pedestrian? It just things that didn't make sense, but every one of these is a setback to the automated, and I think a lot of people really hope that trucking becomes the area where the focus is first. And kind of what I envisioned was that there would be one driver who would leave a terminal in one city, and he would drive it to another city and a terminal there, but a human driver would actually take the trailer from the terminal to the actual customer. And I don't know what you think about that.
I'll play off a couple of the models you're talking about, and I'll step back for a second and say, having listened to Fred Smith with FedEx and some other people talk about what their vision of autonomous trucking may be down the road. They talk about airline pilots. They talk about the fact that planes have been automated for 50 years, and that everybody who came to Vegas who doesn't live here probably flew on a plane, and we're totally fine with that. But they talk about sort of entrance to exit. That the interstate section of a drive is one that can play into autonomous movement or increasing automation, but intercity, or urban core to urban core, once you're off the interstate, there are so many variables moving around and so many cars and density and intersections and traffic lights and trains and and there's a smart cities program trying to deal with some of these. Columbus, Ohio, I think is one node, and they have a couple of others that DOT and others are working to see, or in partnership to see, with a bunch of universities and some carriers. But I think that and let me back up. They're testing right now, I think, in Arizona. So a few companies are testing Driver still behind the wheel, but automated trucking across the state, and there is a commercial load that actually being paid for. I know of at least one instance, and I forget how public it is. I think there was going to be an announcement, and I don't remember hearing it, so I'll leave the company out, but that was going to be picking up at one border and then dropping off at the other state border. So dragging across the state, drive behind the wheel, but truck automated just to see. A lot of the technologies that go into automation or a fully automated truck are either radars, LiDARs, so lasers, or cameras, and they're still challenged by the biggest problem we all have, which is passenger cars cause most of the collisions with large trucks. And was talking to somebody last night about how one really big CEO, really big fleet CEO was talking to me about investment in his fleet, and had invested $1 billion over 2 years in his fleet. And they had done that largely to be able to integrate some new safety technologies, collision mitigation and some other things. And what they found was they started to move away from these rear end collisions where the black box in the car would pick up that the driver's foot didn't even touch the brake, like just, truck was stopped, hit the truck going 70, horrible fatal accident, a number of those, and almost sure that they were texting, or not paying attention to the road, but that their collision mitigation and warning technologies have taken those collisions down by a factor of like 10. And so a lot of the automation that is being put onto trucks is making it more efficient, reducing liabilities, making it better for the drivers. The 700 and some odd drivers that Jack was talking about that were fatalities last year, huge tragedy, and often not of their own making. So anything we can do to make those interactions between cars and trucks better, those will build towards a fully autonomous truck. But right now, and we make this argument with the sort of rainbow and unicorn crowd talking about Google cars and this and that these are right around the corner because we read the same articles. The incremental technology that's getting built in is a wise business investment. For fuel economy, there's platooning. I don't know if you all have talked much about platooning, but those are sort of direct communication between a lead truck and then trucks behind it that have very tight windows. That the fuel savings is around 10%, in these following trucks just drafting off the first one, but it requires automated braking and a little bit of steering assistance and some other things. So Peloton is a big company that does that. These have huge benefits that are passed along. So as carriers are able to reduce their fuel spend, it makes them more competitive and able to increase what they're able to do. And frankly, it also brings new drivers in. A number of you I talked with last night were focused on how do we get young people into this career. It's people see it as a grinding gears and not the millennial feeling profession that people think it could be. Pays great. Average median salary is 55 grand, but there are a lot of people making 80 to 100. So it's a great middle class job if you're willing to work hard. But bringing people in, a lot of these technologies we think do appeal, not just to what our stereotype of professional truck drivers has been, but to this younger group of people too.
Okay. How about intermodal for you? Is that something that's not big for short line rail, Mike?
Yeah, it's not a huge market for us. Certainly we see it, we serve several of the ports and so operate on that side of it. I think there's a couple of things, and you talk about autonomous trucks. I think where you're going to see it more in the short run, and in fact in Long Beach they're running a trial, is in what I would call a closed loop system. So today within the port, you've got drivers that are running back and forth from dockside to the waiting yard or whatever. That's a perfect example of more of a closed loop system where you can have more autonomous trucks, right? You don't have cars to worry about. So I think that's where you're going to see a bigger piece of that. I think the other thing that I heard recently that I thought was a great line is said, people tend to overestimate technology impacts in the short run. So in 2-3 years, maybe it's not going to look a lot different than it does now. But they said people tend to underestimate technology impacts in the long run. So in 10 years, it may look wildly different than we really think right now. And I think that's a pretty good line, and that kind of is I feel that as it relates to some of the autonomous things in transportation. But I think in the short run, some of the things that are out there and have become really cheap to do is more technology sharing. And so an example I'll give you, again, actually out in the Long Beach area, they have a new system that GE Transportation is running out there that has all the drayage companies, the shipping lines, and the local industries are all on the same system to see where things are in the system. Because one of the things that happens is uncertainty. And you know, the example I think that was in the magazine that just came out about railroad is ordering cars, right? So folks, they get concerned they're not going to have cars, so they order more than they need. Then the railroad starts to ship more than they need, and you know, everything gets to be kind of a mess. What we're piloting together with Norfolk Southern and one of the paper companies is really a complete visibility where the paper company's feeding in their actual production into the system. Norfolk Southern is feeding in the rail cars that are headed that way, and we're feeding in real time where those rail cars are on their way to the plant. So that gives everybody a little more certainty about what goes on in the system. And so everyone then can back out all the, let's say, safety measures that they put in. And having everybody just looking at the same information has provided really great benefit to everyone. So it's a technology piece to what has traditionally been a relatively low-tech business, but frankly has a lot of value. And so that's where we talk about, you know, the flashy things, but really it's some of the simple things of sharing information that can have a lot of impact in the short run.
And just for a color commentary kind of statement from me, I think what people need to do in our industry, and really any industry out there that's shipping and you're looking at intermodal versus truck, is the distance of how far you're going with the load. So for most ferrous runs, I don't think that you're going to go a long distance with the material. But for non-ferrous, it tends to travel longer distances. So for instance, for material that we're shipping from Salt Lake City to Chicago, which tends to be a bigger market for us, a lot of times if we can, we'll put that in a rail container that's intermodal, and then it'll go from our plant to the ramp, which is, I don't know, 7 or 8 miles away, gets trucked over there. They put it on a train, and it goes to Chicago, and Union Pacific is who's in Salt Lake City, so that's who we use. And anyway, it's cheaper by probably 20% over what the trucks are, a typical truck would be. And I think that's how you have to look at it. But the interesting thing to me is that intermodal isn't in all areas. So if you don't have a rail ramp that's close, that's not an option for you. And so you'll have to think outside the box. But again, some of the trucking things that we've come up with and that Bill's mentioned here can help you out. Okay, let's switch gears a little bit and let's talk about some of the safety things. We were talking backstage a little bit, especially when we heard Jack Van Steenberg talking about drugs. And of course, Mike's got a big safety push. I've heard their CEO speak a number of times, and he mentions safety every time he talks. Marijuana. I know a number of us in the industry are concerned about it, and it's primarily because of testing. Do you guys both have comments that you want to make about both employee testing and about the concerns you have about whether somebody using marijuana or maybe who has used it recently is going to be a problem in a truck or in a train?
It's a problem. And, you know, as we were talking about backstage, as states are changing their laws, because from my time at Department of Justice, let me just say, federal law is the same. You know, marijuana is illegal. And were the Attorney General or the President to decide to enforce that, things would be chaotic pretty quickly. But with that said, the marijuana policies in this country are going to have to be addressed at some point. And not just marijuana, but all drugs, you know, whether it's opiates, methamphetamine, you name it. It's a big challenge in the trucking industry. I'm sure it's a big challenge for you all as well. We have been working toward better testing on it. So other than current testing, urinalysis, which is something that a number of people in the trucking industry and outside have figured out how to defeat. Been some articles about that recently, and never heard of synthetic urine, but apparently there is such a thing and a big market for it that some states are outlawing recently. But a number of our carriers have worked with hair testing and have found, not just for marijuana, but others, a much better ability to, first of all, detect, so it goes back longer. To the extent that that's something that needs to be done, it does go back longer. And it also has sort of biomarkers for proof of use. We've been supporting this. Congress has supported this. I forget if it was in the FAST Act or subsequent laws that have been signed. Right now, HHS is working with drug testing ODAPSI office at DOT to finalize a rule that will permit hair testing. The carriers who have been sort of on the vanguard of this with us have described when they brought hair testing in, and they still have to do urinalysis, or required to do that. So the hair testing is something they do and absorb the cost over and above, but that they have seen classes of applicants who didn't test positive with urinalysis, testing on hair testing. And so beyond that, once the word gets around that, Sullivan Carriers is doing hair testing, they get a better quality of applicant coming in, or those better able to pass the test, which I've dodged your, should we address marijuana yet? We're still trying to figure that out, but it is a huge topic in trucking.
Yeah, and it's very similar for us, as I'm sure it's for all the members here. It's hard enough. It's hard to find good quality applicants that want to come do this kind of hard work. And then it's also hard to find them that will pass the drug test. And, we have federal regulations, and so we have mandatory random testing all the way through to our office employees, right? Everybody who works for one of our railroads, including myself, is subject to random testing. And I have to admit, I'm amazed how frequently we still lose people at the office level, too. And so you ask yourself what's going on out there. But the reality of the situation is, I guess we're not really in the position to say whether, if someone smokes marijuana in their off time, when are they safe? The rules say you can't, and if you test positive, that you're no longer employed by us, and we follow those rules.
See, and I think what's scary is that for companies located in states where there's been a legalization of marijuana, California, Colorado, for a lot of entry-level positions, if there is any kind of legal use of marijuana, there's going to be a problem because everybody's going to test positive for it. I think that the other thing that's a problem is, what is the level of intoxication? And I don't think that federally we have, and part of it may be because the federal government has, it's illegal, so we don't need that, the use of that. But I think that part of the problem is at what point are you legally intoxicated through use of marijuana, to which you're not fit to operate equipment or drive a car or anything like that. And I think without those kinds of really not so much a regulation, but it's just a defining point, then it makes it hard to say, okay, you're responsible for the accident. I mean, I think that the federal government, by saying, okay, look, we're using marijuana, and so yes, it's your culpability, it's your fault, and I think that's a hard rule to impose on people.
Yeah, well, and I agree. I mean, more and more states are going to do this, right? If for no other reason than tax revenue. I mean, I lived in Colorado for 15 years, and the amount of money the state of Colorado is making is substantial. So it's not unlike gambling to a certain extent. You know, states look and see what other states are making on the gambling and want to get in on the act. So I don't know whether it's 2 years or 10 years, but at some point there's going to have to be this is going to have to be addressed.
Let me make one short pitch too, that as we've been talking a lot about drivers and a number of you all last night, you know, one of the most exciting things that I've seen in my time at ATA is how wonderfully situated exiting service members from the military are for jobs in trucking. And so, you know, we talked to a number of folks last night about, you know, how we have plans, government affairs plans, carrier plans, to recruit more drivers and sort of address this shortage. But one of the really big ones, and one that we're working with the Veterans Employment Training Administration at DOL, begun working with DOT, also DOD, and in many cases we're a 50-state federation of state trucking associations, so many of our state associations are working with us with base commanders, because much of this is with the base commanders. But as men and women are coming out of the military, they're looking for a career, and you know, we can all talk about sort of their discipline, their work ethic, you know, showing up on time, sort of basic stuff that sometimes, I hate to say, can be hard to do, but a clean drug screen and not serious financial difficulties and a clean criminal record are the types of things that our carriers are hungry for. So I think there are wonderful opportunities at bringing people into trucking, whether they're younger people or whether they're exiting service members. And in a year where so much is partisan in Washington, you know, farmers and veterans tend to be two groups, you know, aside from baby seals and puppy dogs that everybody in Washington, you know, wants to wrap their arms around. And so we are reasonably optimistic that we can start this conversation. I don't think it's going to be limited to trucking. I think any industry with you know, with a full employment economy, we really need to bring people into multiple sectors. But as we're out looking for drivers, those veteran programs, exiting service member programs, are powerful.
Yeah, we agree. I mean, we like to say they're used to working outside and they're used to working different hours, and so it's a great match.
Good. Now, I've kind of monopolized the question part here, so there are microphones set up in a number of places here. If you want to go ahead and go over to the microphone, and you may ask away, and maybe you guys want to go different directions with me. Go ahead, Bruce.
I have a question for both rail and trucking. On the rail, I'm from Louisville. The P&L is trying to go to driverless engines, where the man on the ground runs the engines. I like your opinion on that. And on trucking, I know there's a shortage. We have a shortage at our company. There's a shortage in Louisville. What's your opinion of automatic tractors versus gears? As far as, do you see a better quality driver that's driving the gear truck versus the automatic truck? And I know it's going to probably make a difference because of the shortage, but I would like your opinion on that.
Sure, I'll go first. So the question is about remote control operation of locomotives, and where you typically see this is within sort of a yard environment, where you've got a guy on the ground and he'll be wearing a box like this, and it looks almost like a guy who's flying a remote control airplane. And you know, where that's most effective is in a yard environment where it's very dense and he's making a lot of switches back and forth. And I think the opinion is he can have a little more visibility to what's going on the ground versus if he's in the cab of that locomotive. We don't do a lot of that in our operations, and the main reason, not for any particular reason other than the fact that we don't have that many really dense kind of switching operations where the investment in the locomotive or in the remote control technology makes sense. So we don't have a lot of it, but it's mostly just because it doesn't fit our applications. You know, it's a very reasonable approach and economically viable in the right situation.
And I have to just say, somebody was asking me last night about drone trucks. You know, they've begun to show videos of people testing sort of remotely operated trucks. To your automatic question, you know, I think I have heard from more carriers about that question than I would have anticipated. And a lot of it, I think, has to do with driver age. And so drivers who have a lot of experience, almost all of them resist automatic transmissions and believe that there is this art and science to the gearing and to everything else. And you know, I have heard a lot about the data that companies, particularly major companies, have run on sort of fuel efficiency and other metrics that they care a lot about. And it was only a very small percentage of drivers who were sort of beating fuel efficiency, you know, were shifting efficiently enough to make the automatic transmissions of 5 or 10 years ago, you know, to do a better job with the manuals. What I'm hearing now is that the newer versions of these transmissions are automatics beat manuals in terms of fuel efficiency, which again, if labor costs and fuel are your big two, you know, bringing fuel down is of great import. But I think that it is still shifting to automatics. I think that's accelerating. I believe that the new tractors, that the new equipment coming online is hopefully something that will increasingly bring younger drivers in. And so, you know, people's familiarity with electronics and with technology and with the sort of management systems is going to be what the truck drivers of the next 30 years are looking for. So most of the people who are making these big capital purchase decisions at the larger fleets are buying almost completely automatics and having a little bit of resistance. A handful of drivers here and there will quit over it, you know, will join somebody else. But it's going to be there. It's getting there.
And I know you didn't ask for my opinion, Bruce, but I think that the automatics are like driving a Cadillac. And we have one driver, and he used to burn up clutches, and holy cow. And giving him an automatic truck was the smartest thing we did. Go ahead there. Is that Joel?
Yeah. Two questions, and it's trucking issues. Number one, with this gray hair that I now have inherited, the tincture of time, old ideas become new again. At our community college in Decatur, Alabama, back when I first came into the industry, had a driving school to segue people into driving, and we would oftentimes look at those people to come to work for us. But one of the major impediments to bringing the 18-year-old, which I happen to concur, should be available back again in that training and then segue into the workforce, is obviously the rules of qualification under DOT, and secondly, the insurance companies are a huge impediment of having someone under the age, I think, the 21 or whatever. So I'd like you to address that. Secondly, the American Trucking Association and the motor carriers out there, if you ever go to Atlanta, Georgia, and get on 285, I-285, I don't know how many of you have ever been there, the number of trucks that are absolutely stalled on an 8-lane expressway because of the lack of infrastructure. The interstate highways, which our trucks and a lot of carriers use, are just absolutely woefully under capacity or overused, over capacity. There's not enough lanes to carry the traffic that we have. What is the American Trucking Association saying about that?
Well, Joel, I feel like I paid you to ask those questions. So on the first one, when I was working for Senator Shelby, particularly in North Alabama, really strong community college vo-tech programs that, you're right, have shifted, I think, towards mechanics, diesel mechanics, and other things that, you know, serve the depot at Anniston and serve folks over in Decatur and everything in between. A lot going on in Huntsville, too. But great programs, working with Perkins loans, et cetera. The age is something that we're going to have to, I think, address. And Jack might quibble with me. I've had lawyers look at, I believe that there probably exists authority for, you know, for sort of widening reducing the age of drivers. I think, it could be litigated. It's often better when Congress mandates that the DOT and FMCSA change ages. But I will use that as my hook to say we are working with a handful of folks in Congress. I forget if they've dropped the bill or just drafted it, but it's called the Drive Safe Act. It's attempting to build in a system of 400 hours of training, sort of an apprenticeship mentorship system. There are two phases of it. I think one's 180 hours and one's 220. But the bottom line is to bring people 18 to 21 into the industry, which then does open it up to these community colleges. And not just that, I had someone else talking to me last night about, how do we reach them in high school? Like if folks are looking at, I don't want to go to college, what am I going to do? They're starting to think about that in high school, and they're looking for careers. So we are hoping to help in a safe way train and address what may be going on, with the federal system. And this Drive Safe Act, we hope, working with a lot of carriers and some others, and Duncan Hunter and Colin Peterson and a number of members of Congress, could be the way to do it. And to your kicker on the insurance thing, that's been the story I've always heard, both on the Hill and in the job I'm doing now. Great West Casualty is affirmatively saying they will insure drivers covered under the parameters of this Drive Safe Act. So we have at least one insurance company. And for the larger carriers who might be also able to harness training programs that they have, many of them self-insure. So the insurance problem may be a little bit different if you're a bigger carrier, a self-insuring carrier. I think there are a few states where I've heard rumors that South Carolina has an intrastate, sort of four-state government where they're hauling loads and bring some people in and train people before the age of 21, but huge issue. And so, a number of you have heard me complain that if you don't want to go to college, and I think way too many people think they need to go to college anyway, but if you don't want to go to college and you want to get a job, when you're 18, I don't know about your parents, but my parents said, you got to get out of here, and maybe I'm old, maybe it's different now, but, it is something around the age of 28 or 30 that drivers are coming back into schools to learn. So they've had 10 years of careers that didn't work out for them, often have some kind of, it may have a criminal record, may have a drug history, may have other things that make it hard to get them into trucking. So the earlier we can get people, the earlier that we can do it, all the better. On infrastructure, we have, and talking about 285, I haven't grown up in the Southeast, but talking about 285, we put out a freight bottleneck survey, and it's based on real-time GPS data coming off of carriers that share it with us. And so the American Transportation Research Institute, which is separate but a sister organization of the American Trucking Associations, does this. Atlanta always ranks in the top handful of freight bottlenecks, where freight is just bottled up, to your point. So we've been working with the president, working with folks in Congress, basically to raise the gas tax. I mean, we've been trying to do this for 20 or 30 years. People haven't done it since '93. My big sales pitch on it is, either we're going to spend on infrastructure or we aren't. We all know that we're going to spend on infrastructure, and the states are not going to be able to handle it all. Out in the middle of Nebraska or other states, in the rural middle of the country, there's absolutely no way. And P3s is one of these sparkly, let's bring private investment in. That means tolls is what it means. So, the people do not invest, investors privately do not invest in things that don't bring a return. What's their return? It's tolls. And tolls are more aggressive and cost more than raising the gas tax 20 cents, which we haven't done since '93. So as I maintain, it ain't conservative to borrow money from China. Right now, we're spending $60 billion a year through the Federal Highway Administration and raising 40 to 45. So we're borrowing $15 billion a year from pension funds in China just to fund the roads we have now. That's not a conservative thing to do. Reagan raised the gas tax and made a really compelling case. We have a website up if you're interested in it. We're glad to share it with you. But so you're right on both counts.
Gary.
This question's for Bill. CSA has been out for a while. Some of the things I've seen with working with it, I like the idea of positive leading indicators with CSA as it affects the crash indicator. And so what Jack was talking about earlier today, in the last several years, we've been seeing the fatality rate start to come up again with incidents that involve trucks on the roads. Can you speak to any correlation, or is there just so much other outside influences that even though we strive for continuous improvement with CSA, and they are leading indicators, which should lower the crash indicator, but yet we're seeing last several years more fatalities. Can you speak to that?
So I'll try to handle that in two sort of different buckets. On CSA, we're for safety and we're for data, legitimately. People that join ATA are not trying to skirt the rules, and not that everyone's perfect, but so I think CSA is important. Preceding me, some of the work that went on, I know ATA had been a partner. ATA then, had some challenges or some questions, concerns about sort of the way CSA was being implemented, and how predictive it was, and how much of a penalty it was sometimes when it wasn't the carrier's or necessarily the driver's fault. I don't think the correlation between the sort of increase in collisions, at its simplest, I think that's more people on the road. And so traffic numbers are way up, so I really think it's just number of interactions of vehicles. So as the law of large numbers, as those numbers have been going up, I really do think it's largely that. We have supported electronic logging devices. I've had some of the most aggressive, profane emails you've ever seen. My boss had death threats. As Jack mentioned, it is basically exactly the same as a logbook. It's just you can't cheat now. And so people, I say cheat a lot. Some people don't like that, but fudge your logbooks, whatever it is. But there's not the flexibility. And I think in a small way that's contributing to capacity. If people said they drove 1 million hours last year, I'm just making up a number, maybe they really drove 1.2 million, 1.1 million, and now they're only able to drive 1 million. I think that's going to benefit shippers and everybody. I think it's going to be safer. I know it's going to be safer, but I really do think that it's going to increase the amount of data that's available to shippers. So when you're trying to work with shippers, you'll have access. I think it'll be that kind of two-way relationship where you'll have access. But a great example from a meeting like 3 weeks ago, a big trucking company, I say big, medium-sized trucking company in Oklahoma, a guy came up to me, we were talking about electronic logging devices. A lot of our folks in the middle of the country, not big fans of ELDs, just sort of don't like government telling them what to do. And I'm from Tennessee, I don't either. But on this one, it's kind of like, why would you be using a 19th century technology in 2018 just to do your logbooks? So the point he made was, he said, look, as soon as we adopted e-logs, 8 or 10 years ago, the amount of decisions that we were able to make smart choices on just exploded. And one example he gave me is, a sort of dedicated route of deliveries that they had to, convenience stores, small mom and pop shops. And once they had data, they were wondering why one driver was less efficient. It was stopping at this convenience store kind of out in the middle of nowhere, and it was always like a 45-minute stop. And it turns out that the clerk there would just wear him out, and he was too polite to stop talking to him. So but that helped him have a conversation with the store manager, and just little stuff like that is efficiency that builds to more capacity. So I think the data that people have is going to be really powerful for shippers to say, how can I be a better customer of yours, which is going to add capacity, it's going to bring rates down, and it's going to make companies that want to work with you so your load's not the one they're turning down.
Pop.
Yes, son. I'm listening to what I think is somewhat of a failure of ourselves in our society, that we don't look at truck drivers, mechanics, ourselves that have to get our hands dirty. And there's something wrong with that. And I look at bank vice presidents why are they there? They should be in another, 10 years later, they wake up to the fact that they should never have been in the banking business. Trucking, a far better business to be in. It's that imagery of what is picked up in schools, whatever. You've just said salaries that they're very good sounding, and I think that the image done to, and it's false. This is a core of our problem, I think, in encouraging people to look seriously. Mechanics, you get your hands dirty, but what the result of that in making your equipment run safely, take and make something that didn't run, that's a great feeling. How do we change our outlook on trucking, rail, getting hands dirty? The millennials are scaring me on this.
AAR's done a good job, I think, with an television ad campaign.
Yeah, I was going to say there's a couple of things that we do. Absolutely agree with you. I mean, so I have two sons that are in high school and down in Florida, and so I was in the school the other day, and I was talking to one of the teachers, and I said, so when I was in high school, we had, wood shop, we had metal shop, we had those types of things in our high school, and it was a more rural area, I grant you that. But those programs have disappeared from a lot of the high schools, right? So everything is college prep, to your point, right? Yep. There's this perception that that's what everybody needs to do. So, one of the things in our area that it has come up is, back to the community college question, is they have sort of a dual enrollment program with the local community college for more of a technical track, right? To be able to get some of that out there. So I think there definitely is some work that needs to be done on the education side. One of the things that we do as a company is we're actively involved in what's called Operation Lifesaver. And so we're out, our folks volunteer, and they go out into schools, and it's mostly about crossing safety. That's really the message that we're there to talk about, is to get kids to tell their parents not to drive around the crossbucks at the railroad crossings. But what we're also doing is trying to deliver to these kids from elementary through high school a message about railroading and about how it's a real thing. And I've been in various areas of the supply chain my whole career, and I tell people, I said, it's amazing how many people in this country don't really think about or know how their goods get to them, right? There's this perception that it just shows up in Walmart, right? And so, people get tired of me at cocktail parties talking about railroading because it gets a little old. But the reality of the situation is we've got to find a way to be able to continue to educate people out there that these things don't just happen. And one way we try to do that is through Operation Lifesaver in the schools.
We have some pretty neat programs in. We have an image campaign. We have some image trucks. We have Volvo and Mack each donate a tractor to us, and then we have sort of branded trailers that we send around the country, and a lot of that is to schools. And there's, I believe, in one of them a sort of a classroom setup. Just some of it's about how trucks can't see blind spots very well, so sort of blind spot awareness, much like your rail crossing. But a little bit of it's safety, and a lot of it is just awareness of what truck drivers do and what a great job it is. And I think there are places that seem to be overrepresented, and I know, having met with a ton of them, North Alabama is a great example of where the communities have a really serious connection to trucking, and not always big carriers. But if you're 25 years old and you want to live, you don't want to move to a big city. You don't want to move to Washington, D.C. You don't want to move to Atlanta, but you want to live somewhere like Decatur, Alabama. You can drive a truck for a carrier that's based in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. You can drive a truck for Walmart. It's an amazingly fungible career with a great salary. And 98% of the ATA members have employee health care, and 94% have retirement benefits. So it's just a really solid, old school American career.
One other question. I'm sorry I didn't ask it when I was up before. Goes to the railroad issue. We that are in the scrap iron business need gondola cars. And gondolas seem to have fallen out of favor with the class ones, of which where we have to rely for to get system cars.
Right.
What, I mean, in light of the explosion due to the tariffs of the steel industry, there seems to be, and I know there is, in Savannah, confirm it, there's a lack of gondola cars. What, if you know that you can impart, because I know y'all don't own a lot of cars,
right,
the short line railroads, but what's being done to meet the need by increasing gondola car availability?
Yeah, that's a great question, and so within our network, and you're right, there are a lot of locations where we don't provide cars. There are some where we do. We have a fleet of about 1,500 gondola cars, and some of those are in pig iron service. They're not all scrap, but and we actually just took our fleet up by about 10% earlier this year. We located another 150 cars. There's a couple of issues, just speaking generally about car supply. One is sort of a railroad car is a 50-year asset, right? So when a railroad goes and buys a new rail car, they're expecting to run it for 50 years. And I think one of the things that happens for the railroads, especially when there's a short-term surge like this, right? As you say, well, let me phrase that. What could be a short-term surge? Based on tariffs, we get a different administration, a different outlook. Maybe things look different in 2 years. Well, now you're sitting on this 50-year asset that you've only been able to run for 2 years. And that, I think, is the hesitation a lot of times by railroads in general when it comes to investing in longer-term assets like that. Can't speak for the class ones, but I know just sort of the railroad economics of it. So, you know, the things that we usually try to do is we look for what's out there on the secondary market, right? What can we lease for a period of time so we don't end up holding the bag? And we may pay a little bit more in that short-term, for that short-term lease rate, but frankly for us, that's a way to kind of hedge that risk of the market changing. And look, I also know that a lot of times in the scrap business, you're almost in a spot market for a certain piece of what you do. The hard part again is, you know, you're investing in a 50-year asset to play in a spot market. So by the time you charge enough to cover that risk, then you're no longer competitive, or the railroads are no longer competitive with a truck move or with a local source. So that's a little bit of the catch-22 on the car supply side of it, at least from my perspective. But certainly what we try to do to mitigate that is look for, you know, cars that are close to the end of their useful life that we can lease for a shorter term period. That's what we do.
I just wanted to mention how regulations foul us up, and how they get passed, I don't know. But I rode in a private plane with 4 other people going to a meeting, and we were going to land at a small airport outside a major city. And when we got to the airport, our pilot, who didn't want to wait around 5 or 6 hours, and there was no transportation for him except a car rental agency. The pilot was 18 years old. He can fly a jet plane. The rental agency would not rent him a car. He was under 21. Will someone explain that one to me?
I'll let you take that.
Yeah. I think that's an insurance question more so than yeah.
No, but it's an excellent point, right? And you know, we deal with that all the time. And look, just to get the railroad pitch out there, one of the things that we're dealing with is, you know, 2-man crews, and there's a lot of noise for the intercity trains on requiring 2-man crews, while at the same time requiring the class ones especially to invest in what's called positive train control. So the Class 1s have invested literally billions of dollars over the last 10 years for positive train control, so that if there's a train on the tracks, that previous train will actually stop, right? With no human intervention, it will stop. And yet at the same time, we're saying, hey, you got to have a two-man crew even though you invested in all this technology. And then there's discussion about trucks with zero-man crews. And so, you get some really weird situations about regulatory things because something happened one time and we tried to regulate away from it ever happening again. And so you get a lot of unintended consequences out there.
Over here.
We run a typical medium-sized scrapyard in Niagara Falls, New York. We're on the CSX. An average day would be loading 7 to 10 cars. Those 7 to 10 cars could be going 3 or 4 different destinations. Everything I hear and read about velocity railroading goes totally against the grain of what we do and many of our other scrap dealers throughout the U.S. If you were to project out 3 years, 5 years, what will we have to do as a company? How will we have to conform to continue to get service? Do you see customers like us that are on a Class 1 railroad like the CSX? Will that eventually switch over to a short line railroad, or it just, as it's such a big part of our business, we could never
Or
switch.
trucks.
Or exactly, but to go, the products that we ship, many of them go into the southeast or further into the Midwest. Trucking wouldn't work for that. So how would you see for a customer like myself or a scrap supplier like myself or others, how will we have to adapt to remain attractive to the railroads?
It's a good question, and I won't speak specifically to CSX, but I would say in general, there's a couple of things that the railroads are looking for. First is utilization of assets, right? So working not just on your end to be able to load them in a quick and efficient manner, but also on the destination side to get them unload, so that if they can go from 10 trips a year on that rail car to 13 or 14. There's real value in that to whichever railroad you're working with. So certainly that's one piece, anything you can do to drive that efficiency. The second thing is, any consistency that you can do. So, and again, we talked about it being a little bit of a spot market, but, sort of repeatable origin destination lanes. And I know that's not necessarily normal for your industry,
Right.
But that is something that would bring value and certainly simplify things and frankly get you better performance from the railroad, is if there's a consistent route. The other thing you asked about was, the potential of more lines being short-lined is the phrase they use. And certainly CSX has talked about that. They have a couple that they have out for bid. Some of these lines that are line segments that are sort of less interesting to them, yes, they are looking to short line some of them. And I think the view there is there may be folks with a different cost structure, a different service product that could manage that better than they can. It'll be interesting to see how far they go with it. There have been a lot of different discussions in the industry. It's really going to be up to them on what they want to do. So you might see that as well.
So one thing that I want to mention is that I think we've heard this twice now from both of our panelists, and that is that both of them have mentioned scheduling as one of the things that you can do to help with your costs and help with everything else. And to me, if you know that you're going to have a load that's ready every Tuesday at 3 o'clock, somebody can make that work for their schedule too. And the more certainty that there is within your transportation, the knowledge of everybody getting together and knowing that, the better off you are in being able to get a regular hauler for that. So I think that's important. One thing that I would not have asked until this morning when I saw most of the commodities are up. The metals all seem to be up this morning. This is nice to go out on a high, everybody. But oil's also up. And one of the things that I'd heard in terms of fuel surcharges was once oil was at $59 a barrel or higher, that fuel surcharges tended to be implemented at that point. So I'm going to ask both of my panelists to comment about that and tell us if there are thoughts about that, or if they want to talk about oil and fuel availability here in the country, what the capacities are, and any thoughts they have.
I haven't heard when people might implement surcharges. We've been talking more about whether states with really hideous regulatory regimes may see surcharges before fuel. Some on the left coast, but I tell you what, one of the more interesting things in talking to this administration has been sort of how consistent the president and the folks working for him, whether it's Pruitt or Zinke or the whole team of folks, in looking at how can we provide stability, sort of longer term stability in oil leasing, whether it's ANWR that came through the tax bill, approving permits, some ocean drilling permits, but also onshore. And so the longer term commitment, coupled with the productivity and bringing the cost down in fracking. So, as we look at more stable prices over the next decade and expect those, I think, regardless of what the next administration may be, but sort of building that in right now, has our folks generally optimistic about it, continuing to support a growing economy. There are going to be ups and downs. It's a commodity, and there are going to be crazy things going on in other parts of the world that have significant impact on it. But the domestic drilling, we believe, is going to be sort of the underpinnings of a much more stable fuel market.
Yeah, and I think I would agree with that, but as soon as I say that, something will probably happen tomorrow. That's sort of the way my life works, right? And as far as fuel surcharge in the rail industry, every railroad sort of has their own strike point, and every tariff is a little bit different. So I don't know whether $59 is going to kick some in or not. It just depends on which railroad you happen to be on. But I do think there have been some changes over the last few years, and certainly we've adjusted our tariffs a little bit. For us, we really do see the fuel surcharge as it's not a profit-making exercise for us. I mean, it really is just try to recover that base measure. And certainly some of the adjustments we've made in the last 5 years has been to reflect that. And we've seen some of our customers actually really benefit as the prices have continued to go down, to make sure that we tracked with that.
And I think it's for us, it's carrier specific. So, the longer and deeper the relationships with the customers, I think the more that's built into the system, and that when it's going up, everybody understands and there's a charge. People playing the spot market probably a little bit less, though the market tends to normalize over time.
Okay, and the reason I even said this is there was a report in the Wall Street Journal today where they're talking about maybe the Permian oil basin having hit its peak in terms of oil production. And so oil was up $1.50 when I looked earlier this morning, and I discount that just because I'd heard from probably the 1970s or 1980 that we were running out of oil, and here we are, it's almost 2020, and we still have plenty of oil and things seem to be working out just fine. So we're almost out of time. Do you guys have anything you want to sum up, or have I missed anything that you'd like to comment on?
No, I don't think so. I appreciate everybody coming out this morning. From a rail perspective, I think, I had, as usual, excellent timing as I saw the cover story on the Scrap magazine on Friday. But, certainly we recognize that there are some challenges in trying to match up the needs of the rail business and the needs of all of your businesses. And one of the things from a short line perspective, certainly on the service side, we work hard to try to match that up best we can. And so for those of you who are our customers, I know there are some here, we appreciate your business.
I knew very little about the scrap industry, so I'm just delighted to be here. And with the number of motor carriers you have, anyone who wants to understand better what sort of American Trucking Association does and how we on the government affairs side with Billy and others can do more, we'd love to do it. So appreciate you being here.
Well, I'd like to thank both of our panelists. I appreciate everybody who managed to get out of bed. I think it was an informative program. just for housekeeping stuff, I know that the exhibit hall's open, so please go down there. I know that I need to make an appearance. And for everything else, the rest of the seminars are all starting about now, and we have lunch in the exhibit hall a little bit later on, so thanks very much.